Shoulder with us out here. I think we got Hunter on the line now. Hunter, what's up, my guy? Thanks for doing this. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back on air with you, bro.
Appreciate you,
having
man.
me.
Yeah, been a sec. Good talking to you as always. Chris, by the way, Chris Watkins was just out in. Oh, I'm mixing this up. He was out in Chicago, actually. I don't know why I'm thinking Detroit. He was out in Chicago for that Minnesota game 1, and I guess it ended up working out in his favor. But obviously, we got you here to talk about Dennis. And first, though, before diving into him specifically, I'm kind of curious your impression on the Kings season last year. Obviously, you got a little bit of a, I guess you could say, outsider perspective after having been covering it so closely for a handful of years there. Just what were your impressions of the Kings season last year and, making that move over to Monty McNair and Doug Christie, or sorry, to, Scott Perry and Doug Christie?
Of a night owl, so when I would come home from games, I would do my best to keep up with Kings games and see how things were going out in Sac. And I will say there's a lot of talent on the team, although it may not be very cohesive in as far as one unit. But yeah, I mean, there are assets on the team, and I'm interested to see how Scott and now Doug can kind of put everything together all this year.
Yeah, and obviously ended up trading De'Aaron Fox in the middle of the season. We've said our 2 cents about how I personally don't think that was a very good deal, and Scott Perry might be in a lot better situation if he got to, do the trade for De'Aaron Fox this offseason as well. But instead, point guard void after that deal, they end up signing Dennis Schroder this offseason. And Dennis obviously made his way over to Detroit in the middle of the year last year. What was your initial impressions of Dennis? Obviously a guy that, was on Brooklyn at the beginning of the year, and then he's on Golden State in the middle of the season after the DeAnthony Melton injury. And then he ends up making it over to Detroit. And, I'm sure you had a similar situation where we're sitting here like, okay, this guy's on his 10th team. It was the 9th team when it went to Detroit. What were your initial impressions of Dennis, and how much did those fit as it all played out?
Right off the bat, I was interested in the fact that he was constantly talking as someone who constantly talks. So he, I think, was a big asset to the Pistons off the bench. Just with his veteran leadership, the Pistons were such a young team, still are, but it was really Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Dennis Schroder as the veterans, and really the only players above 30 at the time. So he was, I would say, a pretty steadying presence in the locker room. You could see in the postseason that he was more used to some of those high-pressure situations than some of the younger guys on the Pistons. And his jumper was kind of something that was a work in progress and reliable in the bigger moments, but he just seems to be someone who plays his best on the biggest stages.
Yeah, which, I can't promise that the Kings are going to necessarily give him big stages like Madison Square Garden in the first round of the playoffs, but, it may be something. There's definitely going to be a lively crowd at Golden One Center. One thing I'm curious of is, Cade is obviously point guard of that team, or just, main facilitator and the hub of everything there. So how much did you see Dennis really functioning as, I guess a traditional true point guard in that system, compared to, obviously having Cade run the show? And there's value in being able to do both. Obviously the Kings with Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Domantas Sabonis are going to run through those guys, but I still think they want Dennis to run like traditional point guard. How much do you feel like you saw him do that in Detroit?
He did a lot off the bench because, as you mentioned, Cade is the guy. He's a 6'7" point guard, but when Jaden Ivey went down on January 1st, there was a real need for someone to run the second unit, and he was able to do that to really just give Cade rest to recuperate and not have to be the one running the show all the time. And I think he's really good in that role as far as being just the vet who younger guys can turn to. Obviously, there are a fair amount of vets there in SAC, so I think he'll be an asset for sure. We see what he's done overseas in terms of, I believe it's like the FIBA play and everything. But I think he'll be just a steadying presence for some of the younger guys. Devin Carter probably. Yeah, I think Dennis was for sure an asset here in Detroit, and I think he'll be one there in Sacramento as well.
Definitely what they're hoping. I'm going to get to some of the off-court personality stuff that you're talking about there, being a little bit of a mentor, but focusing on-court a little bit first. Obviously, you mentioned the jumper not being the cleanest thing necessarily for Dennis, but showing up in big moments. What would, I guess, your thought be on how confident and comfortable Kings fans should feel with the spacing of Dennis? Obviously, you're aware, but like having DeMar DeRozan and Domantas Sabonis out there as well, there's a little bit of a question of, how functional is the spacing of that group?
The more shooting around Dennis, the better. He and Malik Beasley were they were a pretty good tandem. Malik was a good tandem for most of his teammates, considering the amount of threes he made last year. But I think when you do surround him with shooters, it makes it easier for him as someone who's primarily he's most effective, I would say, getting downhill, getting to the basket, drawing fouls. He's really crafty. He's well aware of how to use his body to get to the free throw line and does that often. So I would say the more shooting around him, the better. But I could imagine Keegan and Dennis likely developing some good chemistry just based on the fact that Keegan has the ability to space the floor without needing as many dribbles as maybe others on the Kings. But yeah, I think Dennis is someone who also is very blunt and he demands the best out of his teammates, which I think is another good trait in him. So I think as long as players on the Kings are just kind of receptive to his communication style, he'll be good at getting the best out of guys.
Yeah, and how would you sort of describe that communication style? I know you did a little bit there, but I think when the deal first went down, I texted you about it, and one of the first things you pointed out is how much Cade mentioned that Dennis was helpful to him off the court as well. So how did you see, that be a benefit? Obviously, the Kings are looking for a little bit of a tone setter here after a funky last season.
Yeah, I mean, it was clear that it was Cade's team, and Dennis knew that as well, but he was there to just kind of coach Cade through some of the moments that Cade hadn't been through yet on more of a playoff stage where it's like the team you're playing against knows you inside and out, especially when you get to 7 games. And I think that could just be beneficial for some of, like I said, the younger guys on the Kings, where Dennis has been there, done that for a lot of situations in the NBA, going back to when he was in Atlanta, even with Jeff Teague, when he was the young guy. And now he's one of the veterans who has seen and experienced a lot in the NBA. And I think he's more than willing to share that knowledge with a lot of the younger guys and people who haven't been in that position yet.
The Jeff Teague, Dennis Schroder storyline is one of my favorites that to still keep tabs on as Jeff just continues to talk about him. I love their content over there at Club 520. But yeah, man, I guess last thing for you, curious a little bit, obviously keeping tabs on the entire league as a whole. Every team, it's all relative to your competition. How you feeling about Detroit going into next year? I think you have an interesting perspective of you got to experience that Kings Beam Team season, and then you end up going somewhere else before like the decline. Do you almost have a little bit of a worry of like, was last year, how do you continue to grow on last year, I guess, right? And that's the harder step.
I think Trajan Langdon is a very calculated guy in how he goes about running the team. And he wasn't keen on making any kind of, I guess, like knee-jerk reactions to the fact that the team succeeded and exceeded expectations last year. And he's really honing in on just internal growth and allowing Asar to develop now that he has will be his first full off season where he can kind of refine his game. Jalen Duren was almost a different player for the better for the second half of last season. Jaden Ivey went down with his fractured fibula on January 1st. And I think all those things considered, Ron, even who just turned 20, I believe. He's just insane how like young some of these guys are, but he just turned 20. And I think Duran and Cade are in Rome right now, actually just like working out together, spending some time. This is the closest team I've ever been able to cover. Mind you, it's only been 2 of them really, but I think with the cohesion that they took from last season, the internal growth that they're expecting for this season, and the fact that the East is the weaker conference, I just did a mailbag actually a couple of days ago, and I see them being probably 4th or 5th in the East. I imagine Cleveland Cavaliers, the Knicks, and the Magic, now that they've added Desmond Bane into the fold over there. Those are the teams that I see being pretty solid in the East ahead of the Pistons. And then the Hawks arguably put their best roster around Trae Young since he's been there. So a lot hinges on health with them. But I would imagine the Pistons are probably 4th or 5th in the East. Never want to oversell it or anything because, you never know. But I could see them being about 4th or 5th in the East.
Yeah, talking to Hunter Patterson of The Athletic. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts on Dennis. You got me thinking at the end there about the difference in the East and the West, man. Like, try not to too much because what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. But, my God, like, be a playoff team consistently.
It's unruly out there, bro.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, appreciate you, bro. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on Dennis. It's Hunter Patterson of The Athletic. Be sure to check out all his great work and keep it up, my guy. I appreciate you.
Likewise, bro. I appreciate you having me on and keep up the great work too.
Always appreciate you. Again, Hunter Patterson of The Athletic. Appreciate